Good evening. I've been in trouble since Sunday morning. Talked about marriage last night. My wife has been on me ever since Sunday morning because she said, "Who gave Josh that information that he just read, that Evan just read?" And I said, "I did." Her next question was, "How long have we been married?" I said 44 years. She said 43. To which I said, "It's more than 43 and a half. I was rounding up." You know, there was the guy who came in on he and his wife's anniversary, and he had her 13 roses. And she says, "Why are there 13 roses?" He said, "One for every happy year of our marriage, that's why." She said, "Well, dear, we've been married for 18 years. He said, "I know. I thought 13 out of 18 for happy wasn't bad." You know, I thought that was pretty good, 13 out of 18, that wasn't too bad. We're talking about parenting tonight. Nice thing about parenting is that when you talk about parenting in a situation like this, your kids aren't with you, so that's always a plus, because then no one sees your children misbehave, and you think, "Well, I look like a bad parent." And truth is that how our children are doing on any given day is not too much a reflection of our parenting anyway, is it? It's a lot more reflecting on how late they got to bed last night and how tough your day was today than it is about your parenting skills. But we're going to say some general things about parenting. If you have the booklet there, turn to page 10. And so we're going to start there and talk a little bit about parenting tonight. Start with me in Ephesians chapter 6, if you would. We were talking last night about the fact that it is sort of surprising that there is not very much said about marriage in our Bibles as far as numbers of verses, the amount of time spent on what marriage should be. And there's not that much time spent in Scripture on what it takes to be good parents and what good parenting is. And I suggested then, I'll repeat that a little bit tonight, that I think part of that reason is that Scripture enlarges upon the thought and the idea that living for Jesus is living in a way that looks like Jesus. He gave us such a wealth of instructions on what it is to live as a child of God, to live as a Christian. And in reality, there's not then a complete separate group of instructions on what it is to be a parent. You're to be a God-fearing, God-loving disciple as you parent. You're to be a God-fearing, God-loving disciple as you interact in marriage. And so there doesn't need to be much individual or unique instruction on that, though we do have a few things. One of those places is Ephesians chapter 6, where you're turned right now. If you'll notice in both Ephesians and Colossians, those two books are very similar. They have apparently similar struggles. Paul writes very similar things to them. One is almost an exact copy of the other between those two letters. So there are similar things in Colossians, my point being. Ephesians chapter 6, verse 1, "Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother. This is the first commandment with a promise, that it may go well with you and that you may live long in the land. Fathers, do not provoke your children to anger, but bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord. Now, we know from the Old Testament that children were commanded to obey their parents, and that there was discipline if you did not obey your parents. We get more parenting skills out of the book of Proverbs than we do the entire rest of the Bible. You know, where it says that basically an undisciplined child will bring shame to his mother. It says, if you spare the rod, you spoil the child. Train up a child in the way that they should go, and when they're old, they will not depart from it. We get more specific training on parenting out of the book of Proverbs than everywhere else in Scripture. Verse 2, when he says, this is the first commandment with a promise, I've seen different views on that. To me, it seems that the easy view is the simple view, and the simple view is there is a promise that follows that. And so it is the first commandment that has a promise tagged right behind it. And the promise is, verse 3, that it may go well with you and that you may live long in the land. I don't know if you've been studying in that direction for a while, but back in the days of the conquest of Canaan and of the promised, headed to the promised land, the wilderness wandering, there are many times that there is an instruction given. He says that God has blessed you and He's taken you out of Egypt. I'm paraphrasing a little bit from most of the renditions of it, where He has blessed you, He's taken you out of Egypt. He is giving you this promised land, this land that flows with milk and honey. Remember that phrase. And then He says, and if you do well in the land, you will be blessed, and I will bless you, and I will keep you, and I will make it nice for you, basically, the Lord is saying. But then He continually often says, but if you do not, I will take you out of the land. In other words, if you don't do well, I'm going to take you back out of the land. And I'm going to let you know that you didn't do well because I'm going to take you out of the land. And what happens a few hundred years after they go into the promised land? You know, if you're a history buff, by 721 BC, He takes the northern 10 tribes and He carries them away into Assyrian captivity. And He tells them that I'm taking you away into captivity because you have not done very well. And then in 586 BC, He takes the southern kingdom of Judah and He sends them into Babylonian captivity. And He even tells them, He says, when you go into captivity, I want you to do what Nebuchadnezzar says. I want you to do what the king says. And if you'll do what the king says, you'll make it through and you'll come back. But if you don't, He's going to destroy you because He is my servant, my discipline on you. Point being, God disciplines His own people. If there is a problem that we have today in parenting, the biggest problem is what?
Lack of discipline.
The lack of discipline. Now, in discipline, I'm not talking particularly about punishment. Punishment is a part of discipline, but the word discipline in Scripture is instruction and training. It is molding and mentoring, and it's all of those things wrapped up into one. But somehow, and I don't know that we have decided on a different parental model, or if just as generations have gone on, we ourselves are more undisciplined and we don't see the need to discipline our children. And oftentimes parents today, by the time they see a need to discipline their children, the reality is it's too late to discipline your children. Teenagers are a whole different problem, right? Evan says, well, I don't know. One day, brother, right? One day. when children are little, the consistency is something that's very important. You be the same, you be consistent. Now, Patricia here would know, when you get kids that are a little bit older, Miles, those ages, that there's a different mindset at that point, because I know for me at that time of my girls' lives, it was like pick your battles. I'm not fighting every battle. I'm going to win this war. So I'm choosing which battles to fight and which battles not to fight. And I'll tell you that my girls were teenagers, and a couple of times, particularly one time I remember, it was my youngest daughter. She was the more sassy one of the bunch, and she walked in one day and she had a really bad day at school, and I knew she had a bad day at school. But I had said something, and her response to me was just pretty disrespectful, and it was just right on the edge of really going off the edge. And I was, what I thought at the time, composed enough and disciplined enough myself that I simply looked at her and I said, I know you've had a bad day. I know you've had a bad day, and you better watch it, because that was really close to the edge. I said, and I kind of looked at her and nodded, and she nodded back to me, and that was all of it. Because that wasn't a day to say, this was disrespectful. Now I'm going to tell you what disrespect is about, because she had had a real tough day. She had really had a tough day, And so you pick your battles. You choose what battle you're going to fight, because you are going to win the war, because as a parent, you must. You simply must. All right, let's get to headed in a little different direction for a minute. Back to your outline there. Children need to be raised with rules that will serve them well out in this world. If you hear anything I say about raising children, hear these next two phrases. We want children who are prepared to face the world. I remember a mother telling me one day, and she had really sheltered her children, and they were teenagers by this time. She said, I don't want them to know about the world. I don't want them to be aware of the world. I'm going to shelter them and keep them away from the world as long as I possibly can. Now, some of you with older children know that means that their daughter never was prepared for the world until she left home to go to college. And that's not what you wanted to see happen. We have to train our children to be ready to face the world. We'll say something about it in a minute, but one of the greatest surprises for many a young child is what we tag as kindergarten. Do y'all tag it as is this the same here? Is kindergarten the name of it, of their first foray into school? When I was a kid, we didn't have kindergarten. First grade was first grade. Now kindergarten is the new first grade, right? And the person that needs to give a lesson like this is the kindergarten teacher, who can tell you about all the children who are not prepared to get out in their version of the world at that time, because they have been catered to, they have been given everything they wanted, they have won every battle so far. And when you get to kindergarten, you don't win every battle. If you win every battle, your kindergarten teacher is a one-year kindergarten teacher. Because if the kids are ruling the class, she's probably teaching sixth grade next year, But kindergarten teachers are a wonderful group of people, because they are dealing with children when oftentimes it is the first time some of those children have seen any sense of discipline. We have two goals. We want children who are prepared to face the world. And we want children who are prepared to face their Lord. Because if we do not train them spiritually, then we have absolutely failed them. We have absolutely failed them. Now, one of the things that has to be in place for those two things to be successful, okay? The next headline there. Truth and reality in parenting is very important. We can wish for whatever we want, but the reality is we must face the reality around us. You can wish it was different all day long, but we deal with reality. You know, a lot of parents have the idea that they think the world ought to treat their child the way they do. And what that generally means is, my child gets their way, and my child is not told no, my child is not discouraged, and the world has to treat my child like I do. Except the problem with that is, the world is not going to do that. And there are many a child runs into a brick wall when they realize that the rest of the world doesn't work like home. So home needs to help them be ready for the world they're going to live in. The truth is, if my training of my children is not realistic, if it does not represent truth of the world, and truth of my God, then I'm not doing as a parent what I need to be doing. Kids are smart, aren't they? Our youngest grandson, his name is Luke. He is 5. The kid has got street smarts like you would not believe. At 3 years old, the kid is talking to Sandy, and he's playing her the whole time, and he looks back at me and grins because he's playing her like a fiddle. You know what I'm saying? And he knows he's doing it. And I'm not saying she didn't know it too. I'm just saying he's working the room at 3 years old. At 5, the kid has got street smarts like you would not believe. He can work a room. He told his mother the other day. We were, Lindsay and Keith, the ones that are here, and Cade and Zoe, our 2 oldest grandkids, they live in Dallas. And so we were going to take Leanne, my middle daughter, she teaches at Harding, and she's got Jude, who is 10, and Luke, who is 5. And we're going to go to Dallas to visit the cousins, as Luke says, the cousins. And so the day before we left, Luke goes up to his mom, and he says, "Mom, when we get to Dallas, how about you stay in a hotel?" He did. And she says, "Well, hon, you know, Cade and Zoe and Lindsay and Keith, they have plenty of room for us to stay at the house, and they want us to stay with them. We don't need to stay in a hotel." He said, "Mom, I'm not talking about me, I'm talking about you." He says, "I want you to stay at a hotel." And so she looks back at him, and, you know, and I mean, she's had him for 5 years. I mean, she knows the kid, right? She looks back at him. She says, "Well, Luke, why would I do that?" He says, "Well, Lindsay and Mama will give me what I want if you're not there." You know, and it's true. It's true. Sandy will tell you real quick, she didn't have grandkids to raise them. She had grandkids to enjoy them. She raised her daughters, but she has grandkids so that she can enjoy them, you know. So anyway, kids are smart. Kids are smart. They learn how to operate in their world. They learn how to operate in their world. You see what children learn, and you reflect back on your own childhood. You learn how your world works, and you learn how to work your world, and you learn how to exist in your world. Now, some of you were a little bit more like me than the average family, maybe. I was raised by a great Christian mother and an alcoholic father. I refer to myself as having been raised in a Christian broken home, because we were. Christian influence in a broken home. That's where I was raised. I learned really quick as a child when to push my dad and when not to push him. And when he's drinking, you leave him alone. Okay? A lot of you know the same lesson. You know, I knew that my mother had patience all the time, but I knew my dad didn't. We learned that. Now, thankfully, my dad never hurt me, at least not when I was a child. He tried to when I was an adult, and I told him we're through with all this stuff. But as a child, he never harmed me. So I was very fortunate in that way by comparison to a lot of people raised in a similar environment. But we learn how to work our world, and we learn how our world operates, and we learn to operate in that world. I'm going to give you a quote here. We all know Dr. Phil, right? Well, Dr. Phil was actually a doctor before he was Dr. Phil. Okay? I mean, like a real doctor, not just a TV doctor, right? I mean, I don't have much time for Dr. Phil myself, but he wrote years before he was on TV. He wrote a book called Life Strategies, and he said this about us and specifically about children. And what he's talking about is the fact that we do what works for us. If it doesn't work for us, we quit doing it, right? We look at our children and sometimes we're saying with these little kids, why are they doing what they're doing? Same reason. They're doing what they're doing because it works for them. Sandy will tell you real quick. Sandy's taught Bible classes since she was in 6th grade. She was kind of like me in preaching. She was at it a lot earlier than I was. And Sandy will tell you right quick that you can be kind and gracious to children, and you can tell them very simply that we don't do that here. You know, somebody wants something that another child in the class has, and they throw a fit because of it, and they cry and they scream for just a minute, and she'll just look at them real quickly and say, sorry, but we don't do that here. And then she goes right on, ignoring whatever they're doing. And she was telling them about a story just in the last few days to where a little child fussing and, and wanting to cry, wanting some attention, apparently at home, poor little me, and it wasn't working with her, and she went right on with the class, and the child realized they were being left behind, and they quit the crying and went on. In the same vein, Sandy has a nephew who, when he was 3 years old, would only eat potato chips and hamburgers. And we were going to keep him at our house for a week. And Sandy's like, I'm not doing that, because we had seen how his mother's a great lady, but didn't know how to parent very well. Hope this doesn't go out very far, whatever's being taped on that phone right there. But because what would happen is they would put food in front of this child, and then the child wouldn't eat it. The child would refuse to eat it. The child would not eat it. Well, then after a while, the child hadn't eaten, and he's got to eat something, so she gave him chips. And so he ate chips. 18 years old, the kid weighs like 98 pounds. Literally, I'm serious. But when he was at our house, he ate everything we ate at every meal we ate it. Without fussing. Never challenged it even for a moment. And I'm thinking, they learn what works, and they learn what works in Bible class, what works at home, and what works at kindergarten. And you say, well, they had to learn how to exist out in the world at kindergarten. Why aren't they better at home? Because they don't have to at home, because it's still working at home. But it doesn't work with the teacher, so I have to act differently there. All right, here's Dr. Phil. And like I said, there's a lesson in this for all of us, okay? This is not just about parenting. I'm actually, because I realize that not everybody in this room is a parent right now, or some of you may feel particular pressure to be parents, but, I'm just not going to go there. But so many of these things, as I said, they're broad Christian principles. They apply everywhere. All right, anyway, here's Dr. Phil. Regardless of the logic, this is from his book, Life Strategies. Regardless of the logic, if I am repeatedly doing whatever it is that I am doing, I am getting a payoff. I will not delude myself by thinking it is not so. If I search, I will find the payoff because it is there. I'm not getting paid off for some of my patterns of behavior. I'm getting paid off for all of them every time. I am not an exception because there are no exceptions. Do we agree that that's actually true? That is true. That is true. Whatever we're doing in marriage, we're doing it because it's working for us. Now, it may not be working for us for anything other than to get some sympathy, but it's working for us. It's amazing how much some, let's say a little bit older kids, how much some kids will do not to work, even to clean up their room. And it says, and some child will endure being scolded. Some children will endure being punished. But if there is a payoff, you just got to figure out where it is. Because there are kids who would rather be scolded and be spanked, if that's what's happening in that home, than to clean up their room. I get tickled at the two little boys because Leanne is, she's got a PhD in child development and curriculum, and she teaches in the education department at Harding. She's pretty much a child development expert, okay? Well, she just is. And I got tickled at her some things that she just, because she had all that education, that when the boys were born, that she's just done absolutely consistently. And it's the consistency that's the key. You can do a lot of bad things, but if you do them consistently, children learn. Well, one of the things that she has done with those two boys from a fairly early age is a lot of times she gives them a choice. They don't have to eat their vegetables. But they do have to eat their vegetables if they're going to have cake afterwards. She gives them a choice that they can make. Now, if they choose not to eat the vegetables and don't choose to eat, so they don't get the cake, they're also getting nothing else until the next mealtime because kids are not going to starve. Okay? So all you have to do is let that one play out one time and they learn their lesson. They learn their lesson really quick. Luke, by 5, has trained himself. He's trained himself. Mother hadn't been hovering over him the whole time. He's trained himself. You eat the things you don't like first, so that then you eat the things that you like, so that you end the meal on a good note, and then you say, how about cake? Because that kid loves him some sweet cake. He does, And so he's taught himself. He's taught himself that very simple principle, And we just got to realize that you and I and everybody else and all these little bitty kids, what they're doing works for them. Now, you may not make any common sense out of the payoff, but it's working for them. Otherwise, they would not be doing it. I know Josh is thinking of a few examples of teenagers because a teenager will go to a lot of trouble to do anything other than to admit that dad is right? When they're just in that kind of a mood, right? Not talking to anybody in the back of the room, okay? I'm not talking to anybody in the back of the room. But a teenager will do that. And sometimes go without privileges, And you think, well, that makes no sense. What's the payoff? Well, they were in the mood. They were in the mood that I'm going to be right here, and I'm going to win, and I'm going to win. And they won. Now, you let them win, and they did without, and that won't play for very long, probably very well. this same daughter, I just talked about the two kids, she's 14 years old. And just not doing things exactly the way Dad thought she should have done things, okay? And we had a pretty good relationship. And she just kind of all of a sudden thought she was an adult. Set her down one time. We just literally walked into her bedroom. We just sat down a couple of feet from one another, and I said, "Let me talk to you about something." I had that little meeting. Kent, I want to ask you because had that little meeting that said, "Everything you have." Josh is thinking, I know exactly what he's saying. I could quote this thing. "Everything you have because I permit you to have it. I'm providing it for you. This bed you're sitting on, the food you eat, you ain't earning a bit of that. I'm providing everything you've got. You need to understand this." And then I said, and this was my moment of genius as a parent of teenagers. I said, think about how much better and how much smoother your life will be if I am your friend. I said, think. I'm a preacher, you know. I've got 3 points and a poem. I said, think of how much more privilege you will receive if you're on the ends with me. I said, just think about that. And then I walked off. Now, this is a 4.0 student, okay? This is a girl who went through a PhD with a 4.0. This is not a child that's not pretty much on the know on things. The very next day, it took less than 24 hours, she said, "Dad, can we talk for just a minute?" I said, "Sure." Went back to that same little, just enough for privacy, just enough where her older and her younger sister doesn't have to hear what she's about to say, right? And she simply said, "I've been thinking about it, and I have decided I want to be your friend." It was just that straightforward and just that simple. And the truth is, we have been friends since that moment. Now, I'm not saying, that a parent ought to be more of a friend than a parent. Oh, no. We never gave up the parent thing. I'm just saying you ought to get along with me. You ought to make it your goal to get along with me. And she has made it her goal ever since. Now, what did I do? The next time she asked for a privilege, I gave it to her. And she learned that if I give a little respect to my dad, and if I'll look and consider maybe that what he's telling me is right and is the best choice, that life's probably going to be better. And it was better. I didn't have boys, I had girls. I mentioned yesterday, I think, a little bit that I've done a little building and construction and all that sort of thing mixed into my life. Leanne is my tile layer and my painter. Leanne and I can go in and paint a house, like the inside of a house, just like that. Because I put her on a scaffold with her head about touching the wall, and she can edge with a paintbrush without any tape. She thinks tape is a terrible excuse for a painter to use. She's edging freehand. I paint with a roller that is 18 inches wide and weighs about 10 pounds when you put paint on it. I can paint a room in no time, and she will edge the whole room by the time I can get it painted, and we move to the next room 30 minutes later. We painted an entire house in like a day and a half, just the two of us. Everybody in the family does that now. Lindsay, Keith's wife. Lindsay's pretty good with tile. She's getting pretty good with paint too. And what was the other thing we were doing outside? And then my youngest daughter, Whitney, she loves to use a nail gun outside on siding. I've got a picture of her with a great old big huge nail gun, and she's blowing it off like it's a revolver, you know. And so I taught my girls, they know how to work. And every one of them can remodel their own house these days, and they do. Keith will tell you that when they've moved into a house a year ago, they've remodeled 3 bathrooms so far in the house, and Lindsay's been right in there working with him. She knows how to do it. You know, you teach them some things about life in a lot of ways that way. But the point being here, when my child, 2 years old or not, when my child is doing this or that, and you can't figure out why, let me tell you why. They're doing that because it works for them. If it wasn't working for them, they wouldn't be doing it. One of my favorite things to see. Well, I'll just do it like it's here. Little child, parent, child, parent. Third time, the child's smiling. Parent saying, no, no. I told you no. A parent staking a claim on discipline on a child's game. Because the child is playing a game with you and you don't even know the rules. Well, you're learning the rules, they knock it off, you pick it back up. Why do we play that game? Because we're going to teach our children discipline. That ain't the game to teach children discipline. That is not the game. First time I saw, in the last few years, this was again with Luke. Luke's a challenge, okay? And you say, well, your grandkids probably aren't a challenge. Well, Cade wasn't much of a challenge, I wouldn't say. He was very pleaser of a kid, great great card partner for me these days. And Zoe, not so much. Even Jude, not so much. Luke, oh, it's a whole different ballgame. It's a whole different ballgame. Go to a restaurant with Luke when he was a year old. Let's not throw that down again. It's gone. It just disappeared. No fussing. I get frustrated with parents who are fussing with a 1-year-old. Why are you fussing with a 1-year-old? Why aren't you just making it according to your rules rather than their rules? A child will learn everything they throw off the tray disappears. They quit throwing things off the tray. They quit throwing things off the tray. I've now got a carbonated water. It's settled back down already. Oxygenated anyway. End of page 10. Last 2 points. One we just said, but I'll say it again. So don't ask, why is my child doing this or that? Rather ask, why is this or that working for my child? Making it work for them. Because something is making it work for them. It may not make sense to you. Matter of fact, it probably won't. I said kids were smart. I didn't say they were logical. But you ask the question, why is it working? You fix that problem, you fix the problem. The last statement there. To bring out those qualities of the heart that we want to see in our children, we have to understand that their behavior is resulting from patterns of reward that we are carrying out. We as parents are rewarding the behavior of our child. Before we break, I want to give credit to the man who took seriously what I said last night about marriage. The man who thought, I need to do one thing different. This young man right here, his name is Ezekiel. He shaved the mustache. He did one thing different. Oh, hey, appreciate you being here tonight. We're gonna break here, and so that we'll get our break on time, and then we'll come back and finish up with a few things and give you a little bit of time for some discussion if you would like it. Again, thank you for being here tonight. It's been a good night with some good food, and thank you so much to everyone who has provided the food for us. So we'll take a little bit of break, let the classes take a little bit of a break. We'll be back together in 15 or 20 minutes.